This week on Sprague Woodturning, we take this very, very rustic table and turn her into the prom queen. That's next, or at least that's a hope anyway. All right, so before we do anything to this slab, the base is going to be the same as it is. I'm going to reuse this slab. This black iron pipe is very popular right now. So, and it's a cool look. I actually like it as well. But the slab itself, man, it needs a ton of work. Now this comes from a friend of mine. They got this table as a gift. And it's pretty obvious that the wood was really never dried before the table was made. You hear me talk about removing the pith out of your work. Well, there's a prime example of why you want to do it. We always say as wood turners to remove this because your work will crack if you don't, and there's a prime example of it. If that pith was more in the center here, maybe it wouldn't have been as bad, but since it's near the top of the table, then, you know, it's guaranteed it's gonna split every time. Kind of funny, when my friend dropped this off yesterday, I just smacked on the bark and a big chunk of it come off. There it is there. I believe it's silver maple on the other end. That looks like silver maple to me. But you can see, like, it's you know, this thing's got a lot of issues going on. They like the thickness of it. The only problem is, I'll get my level and I'll show you here. Well, there's what I mean. Look at that. Now I measured this. This is just a little bit less than half of an inch. So, you know, they're going to lose that off of the surface anyway. I'm going to try and flatten the bottom as best I can as well. But, you know, I'm going to try and leave as much thickness as I can. But, you know, it's bad. It's going to take a lot of work to get this kind of to my standard, if you will. Just a rough estimate, I would say that if I were to flatten the top and flatten the bottom, we're going to lose 3/4 of an inch or an inch or more than that. So, you know, I'll try and take off as little as I can. But look at the difference between here and here. Crazy. I believe this was done with a chainsaw mill. It might have even been done freehand as well. Still got the saw marks in it. That's not chatoyance, that's actually saw marks. And there is a finish on it. I don't know exactly what it is. I'm assuming probably polyurethane, which is very common. So anyway, let's get the slab off of the base here and see what we're dealing with. All right, so here's the slab down on the table, and I mean, look at that. That is so twisted. I just talked to the owner of this table, and I said that, you know, I think that what we are going to do here is turn this into a river table. This is so nasty and gnarly right here. What I want to do is cut this section out of here and then invert the pieces and do a river table, a true river table. Ordinarily, on a slab, the wane edge would be like this, and it would be like this on this side. But for some reason, it's not. It's kind of odd. So it must have been an oddly shaped tree when they cut it. Yeah, weird slab. So by cutting this piece in half, I'll be able to run it through my planer and hopefully level things. I don't have a joiner that's large enough to flatten one edge before we put it through the planer, so we'll have to do a little bit of configuring to make sure that that happens. But, you know, I really think that this is the way to go. So we'll take this piece, put it on this side, this piece on that side, and we'll pour the resin down in the center. It really doesn't matter because she wants to use a solid color resin. So even though this wane edge isn't like this, it's not really going to matter because you're not going to see it anyway. So anyway, that's the plan. Let's start slicing and dicing. Welcome to this week's video. Something new, like I promised last week. We have not done any kind of work like this. We've done a little bit of work with resin on my fractal burnt cutting boards, but nothing to this extent. Uh, Here you'll see how hard the bark was to remove. Quite easy. Uh, and this is really shows the why you should make sure that your wooden pieces are dry before you use them. I remember seeing this table when I first got it, and while it was very rustic looking in nature, I don't think that it really had any cracks in it, or if it did, it didn't have very many. But they've owned this, I think she said almost 3 years now, and it has moved considerably in that time and cracked really badly. So, in order to save this slab, I think that the only way that we could really truly do something with it was to actually turn it into a river table. Wow, must have been a chainsaw mill they used on this because it is far from flat. All right, let's put these through the planer. Wow. All right, so for those of you who are not familiar with the proper way to flatten pieces of wood like this, you would first run them over top of a jointer, and that would, basically plane one side of the slab flat. And then you would put that flat side down on the planer itself and then start planing away the top surface till you get two parallel surfaces. Now I don't have a large jointer. I think that I would need one that would probably be roughly 12 inches across, and that's not a normal size jointer for most workshops. So the other thing with getting into slab work and making river tables, it is a massive amount of money to first of all buy the tooling that you would need and a space to work out of. My workshop, if I was just doing river tables, well, it may be adequate, but I mean, I would have to get rid of everything, but you would need a large clean room where you can put finishes on. So, it can get very, very costly. So since I don't have a joiner, what I'm doing here is I've got I think it's a 5/8 inch piece of plywood, and ideally this would have been 3/4 of an inch. And as you can see, I'm putting shims all around the slab to hold it in place. Now when we run this through the planer, it will plane the top surface, and then once that is flat, we'll be able to remove the plywood, flip it over, run it through the planer again, and in theory, you'll have two parallel surfaces. Now this is a 20-inch planer, and if I would have had a 24-inch planer, I would have been able to run this slab completely through there. But I don't know if it would have really mattered all that much as far as thickness is concerned, um, because along with the twist that the slab had, it also was cupped badly too. So it had a few issues. So what I like to do here, you can see me, I'm using a pencil and I'm marking all over the surface of the wood here, and then I'll run that through the planer again. And if all those marks are removed, then I know that it's basically hitting completely all the surface of the wood. So now that we have our flat surface, that goes down on the bed of the planer. And at some point you could see that there was actually such a low spot, and I actually had to pull the piece through the planer because the feed rollers couldn't grab it. And again, I'm running the other one through just so that I can eventually start running them through at the same time once I get that big divot out of that one half of the slab. So now again, I could have made a router sled slash slab flattening mill table, if you will. But this being my first river table, it's not typically something that I do or that I really want to get into. So that's why I didn't go down that road. I'm a wood turner. That's what I love to do. It's good to get some variety every now and then. And the other big thing with this piece too was the ends were not squared up at all on that slab before it was built. So here I'm just cutting these, prepping them, getting ready for the mold because we're of course this is going to be a river table. So I thought I would quickly show this. This is the form that I'm making to make this river table in. And in case I do want to make more of these in the future, I built this thing so that I could reuse it. Uh, it's like I said, like this. The problem with me making stuff like this it ties up my workshop. So if you've got a piece that you're finishing um, in the workshop, well, if you're a wood turner, you know how dusty it gets in your workshop. Well, there's no way that you could actually do any finishing out there. And my clean room isn't really large enough to take large tables like this and do any finishing in there. But anyway, regardless, I figured that I would make one and we'll just see where this goes. It's a good size coffee table size. So anyway, I've got it. And if I want to make more in the future, I certainly can. And you can see why these river tables cost so much money, let alone just the resin alone. Some of these big um, river tables that you see being made here on YouTube, there could be thousands of dollars worth of resin in the table alone. Um, oh, I should show you this. This is what I use to seal up all my molds, and it's just painter's caulking that you use on baseboard prior to painting. So that's all that is. And typically, what I'll do is I'll put this on, and then I will leave it overnight to fully harden up, and then that way, hopefully, we won't have too many leaks when we use it. But anyway, getting back to the expense of making these tables. First of all, you have to have a large workshop to do it. If you're lucky enough to have access to a place that can plane large slabs, then that will certainly take away a lot of the cost. Uh, you know, to try and buy something that's going to plane 4 feet in diameter, you know, it's going to be massive, huge money, and which most woodworkers cannot afford. These are big commercial companies that have these types of planers and drum sanders. But anyway, now you know why a $15,000 river table costs $15,000 because the tooling and the space that's associated with making these tables is huge, huge money. Just like always with any casting at all, you need to remove all this bark and any other loose debris that might be embedded in the slab. Um, I could have sealed the edges on this slab with the epoxy prior to doing, the pour, but it had so many areas for air to come out. I kind of thought it was pointless. So, and I don't really know if you need to do that anyway, especially with designer epoxy. But as you can see, I mean, even on the ends, it was full of cracks as well. So we are using deep cast. Since the deep cast has such a long open time, it will allow a lot of that air to escape from the wood. And that way, hopefully you don't end up with any bubbles in your work. Sky blue again. Uh, they were looking for a turquoisey color, and this was probably about as close as I could get. So that's why we went with this. I really like this color, and that's what the urn was made with there, oh, I don't know, 3 weeks ago maybe. So when calculating how much epoxy you need, the formula is the width times the length times the thickness of the gap that you're going to see between the two slabs. It's a little tough to do here because of the unevenness between the two weighing edges on this. but I think I calculated at about 4 inches wide, somewhere around there. So these are little clips that I made, and that's just to hold the pieces of wood down to make sure they don't move so that we maintain our gap and they don't float on us, which is very important. Since this had to sit 3 days for it to cure, this is inside my clean room, and this literally takes up half of the counter space that I've got in there. So when I said that my clean room isn't large enough to really do this, most river tables are going to be a lot bigger than this. So you really would have to come up with yet another area to do all of your resin pours. And the other thing too is it's got to be heated. So there's all kinds of factors as to why these tables are so expensive to make. Well, my calculations were off a little bit. I figured it would take 4 liters of resin, and it's taken 4.5. I'm just playing with level here a little bit. I think it's a little too high on this side. Anyway, I've just got some shims out of here to level this piece. I definitely want the resin to be above the wood because we don't want to lose any more thickness on the wood. But I mean, that's it. I'll come back and maybe put some designs in this after this sets up a little better. And I'll bring you back for that. And then we got to wait 72 hours. Pretty. All right, so this is 3 hours after I did the pour. Actually, it's 4 hours. And I was going to come out and put some designs in the epoxy, but you know what? I'm digging what it's doing on its own. So I'm just going to let this cure the way it is. Hopefully it stays like this. And we'll see you guys in 72 hours. All right, well, I'm not really surprised by this. I was worried that the resin was going to get to this. This is no big deal. This is the underside of the table and a couple other spots right here. But, overall, I'm relatively pleased with this. I really like this. I don't know what you'd even call it, like a pillow cloud-like formations that the resin makes. So cool. All right, let's run this through the drum sander and we'll address this. It is on the back side. It probably really doesn't need to be filled, but we'll see, but I probably will. Getting ready to use my drum sander here, and here I'm just using a belt cleaner that you can get at sandpaper.ca as well, and it does a fantastic job cleaning up these drums and other pieces of sandpaper you may have. We're going to start at 60 grit on this piece and then move on from there. So I thought I would leave that clip in there to give you a sense of how noisy and the speed at which these pieces go through. The volume, believe it or not, was only set at 9%. So, it's quite loud and you should be wearing hearing protection anyway. And, it takes a fair bit of time to actually level these pieces. Now, In reality, I probably should have used about 5 liters of resin, and that would have brought it completely to the surface of the 2 pieces of wood. It was off just a little bit on one side, and I didn't, I tried to account for the voids that were underneath the pieces and all the big cracks are in it. But it's still, even with the calculation that I told you earlier, it's still kind of tough to figure out how much epoxy you're going to need. But anyway, once we get this sanded flat, we'll address any other issues that we have. But right now, I'm still dealing with 60 grit and flipping it back and forth, and it's doing a great job. And this is a 1938 Supermax drum sander, if you're curious. So I've got one side flat. Now we're working on the other side. You'll see here in a moment that, as I do this and I don't show it all, there I am cleaning the drum again. It's important to make sure that that drum stays clean. That way you don't burn the wood. Uh, the other thing is it will go through the drum sander much easier if it's, say, a new piece of paper as opposed to one that's wore out and clogged with resin and wood debris. You can actually buy pre-cut pieces of sandpaper for this machine, but I personally find that it's cheaper just to buy the sheets in bulk and then cut and make your own. It is way cheaper, and I think you can get something like 3 pieces of sandpaper for, I think, maybe 50 bucks, something like that. I haven't bought the pre-made ones in a while. But anyway, that's the way I prefer to do it, and it's much cheaper. Well, all right, after running it through the drum sander, this is what we've got. There were some holes. I was able to sand those out, so that's good. Just where those bubbles were sitting. But tiny little fixes here and here. There's more on the back side as well, bigger ones on the back side, but this is our top surface, so we got to make sure that everything's all perfect on there. So let's mix up some quick cure epoxy here. This fast cure epoxy from Designer Epoxy is actually a really good choice to fill in any of these really big voids that you have. Uh, to make it thinner, I was keeping it above the heater in my clean room because it can be the viscosity can be quite thick on it. The only problem with that is it really cures a lot faster when you do that. So you got to move really fast with it before it cures up on you. So I'm just going around filling all these holes that I can. I can actually sort of feel the cup getting hotter in my hand, so I know that it's not long before it's going to going to cook off here. So just doing my best to get it all filled up before that happens. And on the other side, I put the duct tape down over top of the resin so I could flip this over. And there you go. It's to the point where it's not usable anymore. And don't worry, that didn't go to waste. I laid that out on some plastic, and we may see that in an upcoming bowl set. Once the epoxy had cured, back onto the drum sander. If I can use the drum sander, I'm going to use that to, I mean, some of that epoxy was proud of the surface. So I didn't perfectly flatten this before I did the quick cure epoxy because I knew that I was going to have to grind that down. So here I'm just taking the last few final passes with the 60 grit just to make sure that things are perfectly flat before we move on to the 120 grit. Like I said, we're going to be moving on with 120 now. Uh, I end up hand sanding this starting at 80 grit, random orbital sanding. And I know that that's basically going in reverse. If you run it through the drum sander at 120 and then, you hand sand at 80, to some people that may not make a lot of sense. But I find that the 120 scratches that are left behind from the drum sander take quite a bit to get out. So if you tried to sand this at 120, you're probably going to have a real hard time sanding that back. So that's why I started at 80. Now I don't have a fancy track saw set up like you'll see a lot of the people here on YouTube that do this kind of work. So I've got a straight edge that clamps down on my work, and for what I do, that's probably going to be good enough. I do want to make sure that the tabletop is square. So this is what I'm doing here. In a perfect world, you'd have a really large table saw with a sliding table on it, and you could just set this piece on there and get perfect cuts on it. But again, I just don't have that type of equipment. I do have a table saw, but it's I'm not going to call it an amateur table saw, but it certainly isn't top notch, that's for sure, or good enough to do this kind of work. So anyway, this is the method that I used, and it's square, and that's the important thing. So I'm just using my little Milwaukee saw here. It struggled at times to get through this, but eventually it got the job done. This is kind of one of the benefits of corded tools. I don't know, they seem to have more power than battery operated tools. Anyway, it's done. That's the important thing. So like I said, we're going to start sanding at 80 grit. And again, you can get these discs from sandpaper.ca, and you can buy them in bulk as well, which I recommend doing. You'll get certainly uh, more discs at a better price. Just try and do a grid pattern so that you don't miss any areas of the surface that you're trying to sand. And it doesn't hurt to even put some pencil marks on there. And once those are sanded away, then you've got it. Now there were a number of small little holes to fix even after using the fast cure epoxy. So I took a little bit of pigment. This is thin CA glue from Starbond, and I just filled in any of those little holes. There was actually even some little rotten areas. That whole area that I'm putting on right there is kind of punky. So I'm using that to harden up these areas. Again, if this was submerged in a pressure pot, the epoxy would have gone into those areas. But of course, when it's cast on the bench, it's not going to do that. So that, the bottom side and the top side, just irritating little fixes, nothing huge. So of course, sand those away before you carry on with any other grit, or else you're going to be doing a lot more sanding than you want to. That's for sure. Now here I'm pointing out a crack, and if you look at it, it's very, very hard to see. It's very easy to miss. But once I put the glue on here, you can see exactly where it is. And again, something like that would have been filled in. Like if this was a resin casting that's in a pressure pot, then it certainly would have pushed that all in there and filled that crack. At least that's what I've found. To clean up the ends, I broke up my belt sander just to get the majority of the saw marks out of it before I switched to 80 grit on the random orbital sander. It's just easier that way. All right, so I want to put a chamfered edge on this table on the top and on the bottom, but this is a nice big powerful router that I bought a couple of years ago, but it came with the 1/2 inch adapters and not the 1/4 inch, and I've got a lot of 1/4 inch router bits and hardly any 1/2 inch. So we're not going to be able to use the router. So we'll have to use the old-fashioned sandpaper and wooden block method. It's still in fashion. Like most wood turners and woodworkers of the world, I absolutely despise hand sanding, but sometimes it certainly is a necessary evil. Um, you certainly can control how much material you're taking off better than maybe some other ways. So as you can see, we're now at 220. I typically jump right from 80 to 220. I find once the drum sanding marks are out of the piece that and you've got it sanded to 80 grit, that there's really, you can jump to 220. You can certainly tell me your thoughts on that. um, I've done it different ways in the past, and this is the way I prefer to do it now. All right, so we're all done sanding. All we got to do now is just do a little bit of hand sanding, and I'm just going to use this 320 on all the edges just to break it and blend things all in, and then we will be ready for finish. So as you see, this is 320, and whenever I'm doing any of this hand sanding, I typically will go a grit higher. So that's why this is 320. All right, we are finally at the finish stage. It's been a chore, I'm not gonna lie. Areas like this, I just kept filling and filling and filling with the thin CA glue, and you know, it's as good as it's gonna get. So, what are we gonna use for finish? Poly-X oil. This is from Osmo, and as you can see, this was put in this bag in August, and it's still as good as the day as it was bought. So, you know, along with that, I've got a spreader. I'll be using that. White buffing pad. And what I'm going to do is use my sander, and I've covered the holes with the sandpaper, and this will give me a bite on the pad, and we'll be able to hopefully spread this finish nice and evenly. That's the plan. Anyway, this is the bottom side, so this will give us a good indication as to what it's going to look like. A little bit of finish there, hardened up. I do find right at the very top, if you don't get all of the air out, sometimes it will harden up a bit, and that's exactly what's going on there. All right, let's have a look at that, see if it's enough. The reason why I want to seal off the holes in the bottom where the sanding pad is because these sanders actually act like vacuum cleaners, and I didn't want it soaking up or sucking up any finish inside of the unit. Just going to wipe a bit of this off, a little too heavy. So products like this Osmo, you can't use them like a polyurethane. The tendency to use finishes is to put them on like polyurethane. So this is truly one of those products where less is more, and multiple coats will build the finish and the shine. Does it ever bring that alive? All right, let's get this flipped over and we'll do the other side. Take it a little easier on this side. Just start with that for now. It's funny, my wife and I were looking at this table earlier today, and we both kind of commented saying that we like the look of the resin on the bottom side of the table than the resin look on the top. But because it's got screw holes on the bottom, that's just the way that it's going to have to be. So maybe if I had to put this table upside down, maybe that would have been the answer. Again, you know, this is relatively new to me. I've just made a river cutting board once, and this is my first table. Okay, like I always say, the first coat, the finish is the best part. Look at that resin. That is so cool. You know, and I'm always baffled how it just does this on its own. It puts its own pattern in it. I didn't bother. I put some swirls in it, but really by the time I left, it was all gone. So that's the resin acting the way that it does when it cures, and it gives you those awesome patterns. That chatoyance there is really cool. Some more there. Let's get the light out of the way. Beautiful piece of wood. Well, it is now anyway. All right, well, anyway, it's going to take at least 3 coats. I just wanted to really show you this one because it's so nice. All right, we'll see you tomorrow and we'll put on the second coat. So this is the next day, and as you can see, I'm using a very fine Scotch Brite pad just to break the surface and any little stuff that might be embedded in the finish. After all, this was right in my workshop that I was doing this finishing. Anyway, it's a good choice for that. You'll see here there'll be a little blob of finish come out, and that's again just from the inside of that neck of the stop loss bag. So I just moved that out of the way and buffed it in the same way as I did the first coat. I should mention that these white buffing pads are in fact Scotch Brite pads. They are the finest ones that you can get. There, we'll let that dry and do another coat. For the last coat, I thought I would use my very fine Scotch Brite pads like this on the random orbital sander. It does a really good job cleaning up the surface. And I went really light on the last coat as well. Less is more, especially when it gets to higher coats of finish, with Osmo anyway. That's it. We'll let this dry and we'll get the base on it. All right, let's have a last little look at this beautiful little table. 100% happy with that resin, for sure. Very cool. I do like this table base. The top hasn't been secured to the base because we're going to change out these bars or not, well, whatever, these pipes. So this slab originally was a lot thinner on one end, so it's not as wide here as it is on the other end. So we're change these out, and then once that's done, the base can be screwed to the tabletop. I'll let the owner do that. He's more than capable of installing this table on here. He knows what he's doing. So yeah, it's a really cool project, and I could totally see myself making a table with the same sort of setup. Great thing about it is it's all adjustable. So you can turn these out till you get everything nice and level, especially across here and across here. And of course, if you've got an uneven floor, it's even better because then you could just unscrew these so that the table sits nice and flat and doesn't rock. Very cool. Well, all right, that's it for the video. I just want to pass on a couple of things. Now, I didn't show it in the video, but these are painter's pyramids. And these are a great tool as long as you're not working with something soft. So that silver maple tabletop actually got grooved up pretty bad by these. This is pretty hard plastic and that material is soft. And if all I was doing was just simply brushing on finish, it probably would have been fine. But when you start using something that's vibrating like that random orbital sander, and the tabletop moves around a little bit, it actually puts some grooves in the table. So after the second coat of finish on the top, on the very top, I had to strip it off and redo it. So if you're going to use these, make sure that you're using either a really hard wood where it's not going to mark up the piece. I left the marks underneath the table. It's underneath the table, so I'm not really concerned about that. So, you know, these here are actually, I think, probably a pretty good thing. I just wish they were maybe a little softer on the top somehow so they wouldn't dig into anything you're working on. So that's one thing. I never did give you the size of this project. So overall, it's 46.5 inches long, 20 inches wide, 7/8 of an inch thick, and 24 inches in height. So that's to give you some scale. That's what those measurements are. Well, anyway, I told you there would be something new, something we haven't done before, so hopefully it didn't disappoint. So if you can share with your friends, I would really appreciate it. And of course, giving me that thumbs up will help with the video as well. Next week is going to be another resin project, but incorporated in that resin is something new to me as well, something that I have never turned before. So make sure you come on back for that. Well, that's it. Take care, stay safe, don't forget that bell. Please share with your friends, and please leave a comment down below. See you next week.